It is the Rhetoric Warriors podcast, special edition, the Rhetoric Files. Rhetoricians interviewing rhetoricians. It's word on word crime, I think. Language v. language. So you want to learn some language games, you've come to the right disco. We are here to play those games. I am Dr. Dan French, American rhetorician, rhetoric PhD, escape professor, stand-up comedian and comedy writer from over the late night in the crazy world of Hollywood. And I am doing this as a sort of a special series within the Rhetoric Warriors podcast, where I bring on some of my favorite rhetorician academics, and we are going to talk rhetoric. So if that's what you're looking for, get ready for some submarining into rhetorical topics. This week, second time I've had him on, Dr. John Llewellyn, professor at Wake Forest University. Southerner, we established you as a Southerner, right, last time?
As Southern as you can be when you're born in Vermont, yes.
Okay, so Vermont, born free and moved to the South. John does the rhetoric of sports. He's got a big history in politics and general lifery. So welcome, John Llewellyn, once again. How's it going,
Thanks,
John?
Dan. Pretty good, man. Pretty good.
So you're at the end of the semester. Everybody's educated and just going to come back and thrill you with their acumen here in the final weeks.
That's the plan. That's the plan. We'll see how it shakes out.
I kind of like it that Hannibal Lecter became one of our famous academics, like in the culture. Like who else?
Well,
Who else do we have fictionally that's this erudite, thrill me, a teacher?
well, I don't know where Indiana Jones fits in all of that. There
One day he was in school.
relatively fewer bullwhips in the classroom than you might think if you watch him.
My
But
favorite
yeah,
part about Indiana Jones, he was literally in class one day. How do you get that job?
I've seen something online that says, the real hero of those stories is his TA. Well, he's off in the desert. He's left somebody else to actually, tend the flock. And that person, of course, maybe they're deep in the credits someplace, but that's about all the acknowledgement that comes their way.
Oh, that's an academic joke. I'll tell you that. That's perfect. That's exactly right. So we're going to talk today about an academic area that interests you and has interested me in different variations, but it's basically transitions. It's when you are either moved out of one thing into another, or you move from one thing to another, and how do they handle it? And I think your area of interest in this has been with coaches, right? When coaches get moved out. So talk about that a little bit and just orient to this topic for us.
Well, the first thing I'd say is I think sports, because we pay so much attention to it, is an easy and logical place to discuss this, and there's so much of it before us so often. I don't know that it's all that different from other things in life, in fact, but it's more genuinely and sort of automatically interesting to us, and it happens more often and more visibly.
Well, the media loves to cover it, right? They will tell us every transition.
Oh, and now with the internet, I mean the teasers and the clickbaity kinds of headlines, and I mean, we're now being invited to worry about what high school sophomores and juniors are possibly imagining as being their schools of choice, and that's, I mean, and somebody's reading it or clicking on it anyhow, so that explains how that happens. But I mean, most of us really don't want to hang our fate on the judgment of a 15-year-old, and yet people seem to be entirely willing to do that.
Well, have you've seen Hoop Dreams, right? The documentary.
Actually, Peter Gilbert is on our faculty.
Is that right?
Guy who produced that, lovely human being. Well, very. I mean, I was so pleased to get to meet him, and then over the last, it's probably been 10 years. We run a doc films program in the university, and he and 4 or 5 colleagues are just crushing it. I mean, it's not I mean, they're not effete about it, but it's not Hollywood. It's the power of documentary and social commentary. And he teaches a class for us on creativity, which undergraduates have told me just blew them away. And he's done. I mean, Hoop Dreams is, maybe the most famous thing he's done, but he's done an awful lot of very powerful stuff. So yeah, I know about it. One interesting fact is, and I don't think he advertises it, but um, Peter shared some of the proceeds of that with the guys who were the stars, if you will, or who were the because his logic. I mean, we talked about it just briefly. Was, without them there is no story. This is their story, and me coming in carrying a camera and harvesting their life without, and he remains close with at least one of the two guys, maybe both, but I've heard him talk specifically about going home to Chicago and catching up with this young, well, he'd be a middle-aged man by now, but um, it certainly wasn't a, let me follow you with a camera for 2 weeks and exploit your life and
Yeah,
experience.
let me take your
Yeah,
interesting story. The tradition of not paying documentary versus paying actors, that makes no sense.
yeah.
But there was
Let me take
sense
your
in
story
there
to my bank.
where they went all the way back, and to those guys in grade school and tracked, all those transition points and the failure and the success around each one of those. You get this sort of really apex feeling and then this fall from grace, the success arc and then the failure arc that comes around it. And those transitions, those story, you know, that story pyramid that's created right up that apex. You see it with coaches, with politicians, with relationships, with Hollywood celebrities. That is a
Yeah.
very strong rhetorical arc right there.
Well, and it's, if rhetoric is how we use language to solve problems or to at least
Cause problems.
well, there's some of that, navigate them. I mean, look at yesterday's news about Julian Edelman. I mean, this guy who's a saint in New England and this hard scrabble, absolutely reliable receiver fails a physical, probably knee shot to heck, I would guess, and and he's cut loose. Now he does it graciously. They do it graciously, but the essence of it is, thanks for your life, thanks for your cartilage. Now, um, clean out your locker, and that's after more than a decade of being well regarded by his teammates, being a fan hero, being a little guy in a big man's game, and all those bases get touched, and um, and your rehab doesn't go right, and you're no longer at least our doctors are telling us you're no longer the machine that we bought a
Well, and
while back.
Belichick, come on, talk about a bloodless rhetorician. That guy, they'll constantly throw new characters, new heroes up in his storylines, and he doesn't hold on to those people at all. He goes through running backs like nobody I've ever seen.
Well, it's about one wood chipper short of a Coen Brothers movie. I mean, it is, and of course the role of the media and frankly the role of the fans, um, with the exception of Brady, um, and you could even debate that one. They're all interchangeable. We love you big time, long time, except maybe not tomorrow.
Well, in New
Uh,
England, like if we look at these places as little story pockets, the little story factories, they each do their own thing differently. Green Bay, clearly a different type of sports story structure with being
right.
community owned and like these long term, beloved quarterbacks and the characters that carry through over years and years versus a place like New England, which really is, it's almost the denial of story. Like he doesn't want a story structure. He didn't care that Tom Brady was a beloved hero that should have been able to stay in the graces for as long as he wanted. He could care less. He just burned right through it. That's a really different rhetorical approach. I don't guess he sees himself as a rhetorician, but he's he's in the denial of the story structure of the NFL.
Yeah, well, and it's as the last 4 years have taught us, if you can get enough people to believe your story, what it's grounded on or not grounded on becomes in some way nearly irrelevant.
Yeah, the
If you can
story structure
convince, yeah,
itself is going to perseverate, and people want that played out. And I think the Trump phenomenon is a great example of that, right? We see him as a villain. They see him as a anti-villain, an anti-hero, so
mhm.
that he is that sense of, bad boy, rebel, anti-establishment, can't control him. And they read all that, whether it's positive for the country or
Yeah.
not.
Well, and you push that a little farther to QAnon. It takes me back to a lot of the narrative theory stuff that we studied in graduate school. Is if you want to believe the story bad enough, I mean, what is a con game? But but a bad story told well, at least to people who are who are willing to lean into it, and that can be a business premise, a romantic premise, a policy premise, but that ability to suss out what kind of story this person wants to hear. I mean, they're willing to suspend disbelief. You have to have the right preamble to to dance the way the way that they imagine it being done. And so blood drinking pedophiles is an image that some people I think it's a visceral, no pun intended, thing, in the sense of it feels really good. These people disagree with me on policy, and they come in all kinds of colors, and they love different sorts of people, and that's all very weird. So what's the worst thing I can make them, to to not have to contemplate the possibility that they could be right. and lo and behold, you've got Planet Pizza or whatever that place is in DC that one of my fellow North Carolinians went up and shot big holes in the belief that that he was acting to protect the children of the world. It seems wacky, but
Well, this
but
come on,
obviously people believe it.
the land of story is nothing but wacky. Like when we start talking about documentaries here, one of the things about documentaries versus full narrative fiction Hollywood, documentaries hold on to a sense of reality and it's supposed to be truth and that kind of stuff. There's a grounding to documentaries, even though, they're storytellers too. But when you start telling stories, throw all the prior stuff about truth and reality and all that out the window. Religion is the greatest example of that. You tell a good story, in a engaging way. You do heroes and villains correctly, which is the QAnon, the pedophile blood sucking. That's vampires and child molesters crushed into one. What a villain that is.
Yeah, well,
Dracula
it's
Dracula never felt up your child, you know.
it's that Kenneth Burke stuff that we studied about. You can't just have mundane evil; you have to have supreme evil. Lex Luthor has to be real Lexi and real Luthery to be an adequate, to be a villain worth investing in emotionally.
Yeah, and it's
So that
interesting. Like if you
yeah,
look at the Democrats as being documentary filmmakers, they love to attach to truth. They don't like to go over into total fiction versus the GOP, which is perfectly fine with fiction. Perfectly fine. Like that whole thing of going down to the border a few weeks ago, the senators to create, a storyline of, oh, look at these horrible people coming in and they shot it at night on a boat and all this stuff. I mean, you're just looking at going, they're doing a fictive storytelling and they're fine with that as a party. I don't think Democrats are more documentary film and these guys are horror film, maybe.
and once you park the need to have much of a touchstone to reality, then it's all just whatever kind of art you think you're making.
All bets are off, right? Say whatever you want, which is a nice freedom as a rhetorician. Like you don't have any ethical ties to truth or all that stuff. And I think the GOP shows that the range of things you can now say and be effective with just incredibly open.
Yeah, so it's if guilt or shame is supposed to regulate our public performances, then I think the last 4 years disabused us of that notion. I mean, it's almost breathtaking what was said and done, and then followed on the heels of something else that was, by usual standards, bizarre. And at some point, you're in psychic overload. I mean, how many times can your mind be blown?
Well, and I explained it today in a tweet joke of a twoke, I don't know, tweak, something. I got to come up with a term for that. That they should rebrand as the dung beetle party instead of the elephant party, because they literally, rhetorically, they just deal with shit. Like watching the last couple of weeks, they're still trying to turn Fauci into a villain. Trump was talking about him a few days ago at a fundraiser for the GOP.
Yeah.
And you're like, how could you go after that little elfy guy who's been in public service for that long? And they don't care. They'll turn anybody into a villain because the villain making machine is ready to crank up.
And in a perverse kind of way, the lure of villainy. I mean, perfection and uplift is hard work, and but sin is ever beckoning, and
It sure is, John. It sure is.
And that's so it ain't a hard sell. You just got to relabel it. It would seem. I mean, it seems to me.
Well, pull it back to sports. Like Belichick or the Patriots PR team did a little bit of this with Brady before they released him, right? They had to villainize him a little bit so that he wouldn't be such a loss, that his arm strength was gone and that he was making bad decisions and they didn't think they could ever win a Super Bowl with him again. They didn't want that 3, 4, 5 year decline that you had like with Joe Montana when he finally had to leave and go to the Chiefs. So
Yeah.
they villainized him within the area of sports.
And like you say, gave themselves a bridge out. Him winning a subsequent Super Bowl somewhere else creates certain narrative constraints on. I mean, but the bottom line is they got him out of town, and his fans and a lot of their fans probably have a kind of a delicious second helping of that, even over against their own intense loyalties. I mean, it'd be interesting to know what New England fans. I mean, I guess the argument is since our team can't be there, at least our quarterback is there, or somebody
that maybe they got a visceral or a secondary victory out of it.
Yeah, and they're not wrong. I mean, they just have to sort of forget the Patriots dirtying him up on the way out, or they either have to forget it or they have to rationalize it in a way that who knows what they've actually done. But
take this back to one of your worlds that you are incredibly steeped in from sports: Duke versus North Carolina versus North Carolina State. So Duke is the villains, right? I mean, they're villainous. Like they're easily villainous.
As a graduate of North Carolina, I have no trouble with that premise.
But Duke there's almost always a bad guy on their team.
The Leitner doctrine. Some people. Yeah, you could say that. And of course, those attributions are really needed, especially when they're winning a lot, because you have to dirty them up a little bit
Sure.
um, to find virtue in third place when, if they're sitting in first.
Well, and you
It's
almost
a
look at
very
it like
interesting
Duke,
dynamic.
so Duke is the villain in the triad, and then North Carolina, with its whole tradition of Michael Jordans and Dean Smiths and everything, seems like the hero. And then North Carolina State is just neutral. I don't think they have
Well,
any flavor either way, other than Jimmy V and the wonderful kind of hero legacy of that.
and of course, he was in fact a colossal disaster. None of his players graduated. They're getting ready to name a building for him over there, and they forget they fired him not only as head coach but as AD. I was there. I watched, and there's something that needs to be said about either the loss of public memory, or, I mean, it's the sort of thing that nobody's even said boo. I mean, you don't remember any of that stuff. You
Oh,
don't
that
read the papers.
story, tsunami that came in, with the cancer and never ever give up, and the replay of that imagery of the last second victory against the giant.
Yeah.
There's nothing that can compete with that rhetorically. None of your reality or truth. Get that out of here.
Well, the other thing that I think may have helped a bit was his brother working at ESPN, which in a way, I mean, the elements you point to are the stronger piece, I would say. But it was also, it seemed to me at least, like kind of an in-house project
That's
at,
funny.
at ESPN, that this is in a indirect way burnishing our brand because of these various kinds of connections. And so, the other, I mean, if you look at the harm done at Iona and Jeff Ruland, I mean, there's a lot more um, people scattered by the wayside. Chris Washburn, you may or may not remember him, but
I do. I remember all these guys. Yeah.
Valvano sent him a letter every year. I'm sorry, every day from the time he was in the 8th grade. He got a letter from the NC State coach every day. They delivered mail until he signed with NC State. He's now a guest of the state of North Carolina in prison, because that's all of the fawning that came with his incredible athletic talent. Basically, was exactly the opposite of what the development of his character,
Right.
called for. And so he's had a couple stints in prison, and he's probably spent 3 times as much in prison as he did in the NBA. And he should have had a 12-year career in the NBA, given his skills. But
Well, and you
um,
see this. I'm amazed. Like Bill Self got a lifetime contract with Kansas recently, and I get it. The guy wins, and he can clearly recruit. Something's going on there. But wasn't that guy just under semi indictment for paying Nike or Adidas for players? Didn't that just happen?
well, I would assume that there's some kind of a shroud or fog or something like that, because of course that's what led to Sean Miller's departure at Arizona. And when the FBI has you on tape, that's not a good place to start.
Right. I thought the
That's
Self was the
that's
same thing. I thought he was recorded.
I honestly don't recall that. My own instinct about it would be, given his scale, if that were true, he would be a bigger story if it had happened that way.
I don't
But
know.
I know there were,
We'll have to look it up. I remember
yeah,
going, oh yeah, that guy always seems a little slippery to me. But so take
well,
this idea, this
yeah,
villainy, right? Like so
mhm,
we're still walking on both sides of the bridge of true villains, like you're talking about the truth of Valvano
mhm.
versus these high profile story villains and heroes. And to me, rhetorically, it's so dominant right now, this idea of if you create the story correctly and you just keep hitting the gong over and over and over, your documentariness and your real lifeness doesn't really have a chance against it. And that is the story of Trump. Trump just hit the
Well,
gong again and again and again and again. No matter what the actual information was.
Well, and to follow that idea, you could argue that um, that Biden's attempting to make more of a documentary, or more nearly a documentary, about actual people in real life, and tangible, qualitative problem solving, as opposed to festivals of symbolism and insult, and the other sort of symbolic actions that were. I mean, much of the Trump administration was symbolic,
It was just
and
symbolic,
yet,
right? It was just
and
tell the story.
yeah,
At least
and
Biden does have some policy and some action underneath this stuff, but he's telling the story of a Camelot story, a hero story. He's just trying to put America in as the hero instead of himself, but he's right there next to it, you know.
yeah, and that that could work. I mean, if you look back in history, Francis Perkins did a lot of stuff that FDR got credit for. He was the president, but she was the brains of a lot of really important social policy. And it's that old axiom, you can get a lot done if you don't care who gets the credit. And maybe, I mean, if you look at the cabinet secretaries and other folks that Biden's put in place, maybe we'll have a revisitation of that. I mean, maybe Buttigieg is going to be, he's going to make a case for being president in 16 years based upon how, what he accomplishes in transportation and how effective he helps, the Biden administration be.
He's
That
been a
that would be
fascinating
interesting.
character. I'd love to hear your read on him. I mean, coming from, I watched him at the very emergence when he emerged as mayor. You know, that was his character, mayor
Right.
of, in Indiana. And then his first emergence was sort of as an intellectual character that he spoke 8 languages and yada, yada. They went away from that pretty quickly. And then he has the touchstones of military service. He's done government service. He's married and he's gay and he's educated. So he's got these touchstones for his story. I'm just curious as to how that's going to well up. Like, do you think he's got to go get bona fides for pragmatic, wonky kind of actual government work? Like, what is his pathway to presidency when you look at it? Building himself as is it a millennial hero? What is it?
Well, I mean, it is as you say. I think it's a long way from being a mayor to being, to running, something massively larger. Because in theory, a mayor can get his or her hands on pretty much everything under their control. Where he is now, he's actually going to have to accomplish things through other people, it seems to me. And that's, not only that you have policy, but that you can make policy happen, that you can convert it into grounded stuff. I mean, I think part of what he's done so far is build a record, and I think to me it seems legitimately so. If you're going to dislike him, you're going to have to dislike him because he's gay. You can't gripe about public
Or
service.
educated,
You can't,
or
or
liberal.
yeah,
Yeah.
or smarty pants. But but all of the, I mean, if you took the gay dimension out of the equation, what would you criticize about his pathway to public prominence? What is he? Maybe he wasn't as great a mayor as all that. Okay, well, what would be the shortcomings? And so, in some ways, I mean, there's some normalizing going on, even though there's a slice of the population that will never, or that it seems to me at least will be very late to the party about normalizing. But by the time that happens, it may not matter. I mean, if 85% of the population is, everybody knows they're here, get over it, then that 15% isn't going to be able to coalesce around anything that matters. I think.
It'd be interesting, like if you and I were his rhetorician advisors. I guess they call them something different in political world, but essentially it's telling him how to build his rhetoric. Like what he's doing now about getting some bona fides, some actual evidence of effectiveness, in governance is part of it. Although Trump never needed that. Though I guess he tried to, grab it from his mythical success in business. So like his touch points that he needs to be a hero, and then his touch points that he needs to avoid villainy are sort of in place. And I think like with him, what's probably going to happen for villainy is they'll just associate him with villains. Like it doesn't seem that there's a lot that would stick to him as a villain, as a human being. He touches a lot of good American, hero points.
Right.
But like they did to John Kerry, who I knew was going to lose the presidential election when he accepted the nomination by saying, lieutenant or corporal, whatever it was, Kerry reporting for duty. I'm like, did you just hearken back to Vietnam? They're going to kill you on Vietnam. And they did, because they just associated him with an evil war and, all the kind of, slander they did with him. So I assume that's what they'll do to Buttigieg in some ways. They'll try to find associations that he has that they can slander.
Yeah, he's not really what he says he is, or we can tell you a more. I mean, it's really, and the same thing's true with, with Kerry. Whether we'll be any smarter if there's a swift boating of Buttigieg. I mean, will we? Does the first one work because of novelty, or do they all work because we really like to see the mighty brought low, especially in such a derogatory, demeaning way? Because it isn't just an untruth; it's a perversity of an untruth. I mean, you did go.
Well, it's again that
risk your
that
life.
story heightening of the villainy, and again, it has nothing to do with reality or whatever. It's can we make this stick? And I think the murkiness and the ugliness of Vietnam. That's why I said he's in trouble, because he just associated himself with a very unpopular war on all sides. There was nobody walked out of there with honor or good feeling. Why would you do that? You want to leave that behind. And at least with Buttigieg's military service, it doesn't have that kind of, horrible complication yet in the military images of it, at least.
I think you're right. But there's another incarnation of the swift boat people out there somewhere trying to figure out a social media whispering campaign. Um, Child molester, who knows? I mean, there's the one thing you can know is there will be no bottom. There will be no.
Well, that was one of Biden's super advantages, don't you think? He'd been in public eye for 40 years, so he had been completely vetted. They tried to get him with senility and then associating him with a deviant son, but he just kind of shrugged those off and kept going.
Well, and the the alleged plagiarism with the speech from back in the day. As I understand it, he had rolled pretty well with that, and it was, on second view, it was mostly a misunderstanding, but on first view, it was handled in such a way that it was able to, to knock him off balance, and that was really kind of the point.
The Anita Hill, and then the busing and the gun legislation, all sorts of stuff like that. But they're little dings, really, and I think maybe that's what it's going to. The politicians are so old now because they've got to survive so much attack.
Yeah. If you were going to blow yourself up, you probably would have by now. I mean, if you had either actually done something problematic enough, or if you were thin-skinned enough, one way or the other, some bullet would have gotten through by now. And the fact that it hasn't is, I mean, that may be good luck, that may be good armoring, that may be everything's been tried, and so there's not really a novelty. Everything is old news, which which probably helps. It's an ask and answered kind
Right.
of a thing like they do in law. We've seen that. We've been there. We know what that's about.
Yeah, it's
So
not fresh
you
meat.
you
So
you got to have another angle.
take a look at that from the Hillary Clinton perspective. The fact that she had been attacked for so long, there was so much hints of villainy, and the original conspiracy theories of Whitewater, and I saw murder conspiracy theories when I was in North Carolina.
Oh yeah,
One of the secretaries who was half nuts on the conspiracy side put flyers in all the professors' mailboxes about all the people that the Clintons had killed. And she got, sucked over into her husband's wake, his villainous wake, with, some of that kind of stuff. But how would you work with her? Like, did she have enough hero? To me, she had so much villainy, even if it was false villainy. I don't know what the heroism was, other than the fact that she would not go away. She was so tenacious. She was a successful female. She was smart. She was a
those
survivor.
those are all, of course, offenses in some rule books. Because I mean, my brother-in-law was in her law firm, and I know people who've known her for 50 years. Um, she's the smarter of the two. I don't think there's much argument about that. Um, and she came to Arkansas, as a hippie girl from New England and by way of the Midwest, and started working, to help with kids and their legal rights and how the state dealt with them and all that from the beginning. And I think there's some people who never forgave that. I mean, the very idea that you would use law and policy in this way when we have in place the actual system that we want, even though it's extra legal and in some cases not legal at all. And how dare you try to impose regular order on on our ways? But she's a very capable person. But I think that's part of why they went after her. Is I mean, they went after her in Arkansas, and they went after her, in '92 and beyond, um, because there's somebody over on the other side of the street who's sitting there saying, and I know this because of people I know who've known Bill Clinton for a long time. Where's the talent pool? Where's the 30 to 40-year-old talented Democrats? How do we kneecap them? There's one way you win the race is, by the time somebody's 45 or 50, you make sure they don't show up at the starting line.
Right.
And that's a form of the long game of it's like giving your opponent arthritis 20 years before you expect to have to meet them, or building up that. I mean, it's a I win when you lose model, and let me I'm gonna put acid rain on you for 20 years, and then I'm gonna complain that you've got scars.
Yeah.
Um,
She is one of the most slandered people in history, without a doubt.
and I think the ultimate sin is being, um, well, I mean, look at corporate boards, look at the professoriate. Um, I mean, our incoming president of Wake Forest is a woman. That's news, but the year is 2021. So, it's this is not 1990. So, but still that, um, it's possible to give offense by simply being alive and by claiming your oxygen.
Right. And
And
all that, the sort of side villainy of coming into the South, not being from the South. You know, Clinton Bill was from the South, so he was authentic. She
yeah,
was an East Coast intellectual. Just amazing, these games of villain and hero, and how they do transcend across so many settings, whether it is sports or politics. I've worked a lot in business in the last 5 to 8 years, and trying to get people to understand these big story structures play out into your marketing for your company and your people. And if you don't understand them, then you are, first of all, you're incredibly susceptible to attack,
Right.
and your entire business can crumble. Look at Jared from Subway.
Right.
How do you
That's
go from this
yeah.
innocuous, semi-hero for that many years, somebody who lost weight and could basically be a nerd who was successful in public, just off a cliff? The amount of money that cost that company, you can't even
Oh yeah.
calculate it.
Well, that's I tell my students, and that's why there's Ronald McDonald, because he has no private life. He's a costume that's kept in a closet, and that a hired actor is put in every so often. And there are rules about, where and when he shows up and how he disappears and all the rest of that. And as weird and artificial as that is, you don't get a Jared out of it. And um, that's a fascinating, when you bet on a horse, and the horse blows up in the backstretch. One stop at an airport and having a phone scanned for some particular reason of, kiddie porn. I mean, whatever it might be, we carry around with us evidence of our crimes, if there are any, in all sorts of easily detectable forms. And Jared is a perfect. In one of the classes I teach, we talk about about the ways corporations. What are the benefits of spokespeople, and what are the downsides? And that's as good an example as there can be of what in the world could possibly go wrong. Well, try this on. how,
Well, this
how do you like it? How do
flippable,
you like it now?
I describe it sometimes as this flippable coin, right? Of villain hero. Like it's sitting right there. Like you are both. Everyone is both. So if people over here, if like you're a super progressive, innovative, educated, nice person, for the Democrats and for liberal people, that's a hero. For non-education people, traditionalists and things like that, that's a villain. So you hold these on both sides of that coin at all times. It's just where's it gonna flip? Who's gonna be able to flip it?
Who's and that's why we have Fox News. Yeah, I can't think of another reason right off, but a place to liberate those narratives. To elevate, to repeat, to entrench, that sort of in a world filled with goodness, um, we may not need, but we're about to get an infusion of snark. We're going to get some Tucker, or we're going to get some Hannity, and all of the smug. What's interesting, I mean, there are many things that are interesting about watching them, but one thing is just pay attention to the adjectives. Doesn't matter what the nouns are. By the time you've got the adjectives, you've got the story. And especially when they're strung together, I find it remarkable, because you don't have to know much of anything. You're going to know, you may not know the words, but you're going to know the music by the time the first two sentences are out of either of those guys' mouths.
Well, even before that, I'm always fascinated by the portrayal of emotionality, especially Tucker. He looks, you know, he portrays maybe three emotions of he's constantly aghast, he's disgusted, and it's on his face all the time. Like he just can't believe, like, how could you, and it's this constant portrayal of those agitated emotions that I think people are absorbing when they watch Fox and when they listen to right wing media. It's that absorption of the emotion that I see, and that constant triggering of the emotional part of your brain that's worried and anxious and hateful and all that. So it's
And
the
yeah,
orchestra of emotions, and they only play one
and
side of the
it's yeah.
orchestra.
Well, and you throw in Limbaugh, and you throw in Infowars guy, and you've got this perennially outraged, pissed off. Can you even believe it? Abomination around the next
Yeah,
corner,
it's a
and
dark orchestra of dark emotions, and
but
they play it
but
so
there's
well.
something. I mean, if you look at some of what you see with the people who who invaded the Capitol on the 6th, if you listen to their talk, I mean, there's this. It reminds me a little bit of Ghostbusters with that river of evil that was under the city. I mean, there's this acidic bile that is, that is very literally and figuratively distasteful. But there's something. Um, I mean, it's a cheap thrill. It's not the joy of watching a child be born, or of raising up a young person, or of helping somebody in a classroom. It is everything sucks, and everything sucks terribly, but you and I are smart and we know it, and let's all circle around the campfire and denounce it. Now, it's that old thing about, any jackass can kick down a barn, but it takes a craftsperson to build one. Well, we got a lot of jackass barn kicking, seems to me, going on. That is the the reason why it's its own reward. Accomplishment is difficult, but bitching is easy. It's one of the things you learn in graduate school, among other places. And it just seems to me that there's that whole subgenre of our public discourse that is always. I mean, it looks like a low, but it's actually a high. If you watch Infowars, and that crescendo of denunciation, and I mean, life may be terrible and there's all these issues, but by God, this guy knows it and he's clear about it. And if I'm clear with him, then at least I've got that I can hang on to. And that kind of it's like a bodily political allergic reaction to any form of humanity or any set of values that isn't on the approved list. Um,
I'm curious,
and
the
yeah,
when you think about this, like, what is the catharsis for having gone to a dark symphony and absorbed all this emotionality? Like the catharsis for typically, I guess, in story structure is you run into obstacles and villainy and you're hoping for the good people to win. And the catharsis is when they do. But what happens when it's this constant darkness? I guess they can put up any hero that they want or anybody that seems heroic at the end. But what is the catharsis when you have anxiety and hate and anger and neurosis all the time, when you're constantly outraged?
well, if you look at QAnon, I mean, the families that are broken up, all the challenges has come from that. I mean, it's a little bit like that study when prophecies fail. If it doesn't turn out the right way, some people bail on the movement, and other people double down. And I think the harder you grip, the harder you grip. And I think that's the payoff, is that you are, the world is black and terrible, but you are one of the chosen. You are Illuminati, you are illuminated, um, and you know what's true, and everybody else are the sheeple, and all the rest of that stuff. So the superiority, I mean, you're still driving a 12-year-old truck, and you got a mortgage the size of a mountain, but and others don't, and you can get all the booster shots you want from between Fox and Infowars, and whoever's going to try to pick up the Limbaugh mantle, of just having it confirmed and reconfirmed that it may be weird, but you're seeing it right. whatever satisfaction. I mean, that's a
it
kind
is a,
of a limited satisfaction, but
and I think they end up in this state of perpetual uncatharticized emotion. There never
yeah.
really is catharsis for it. It just recycles itself over and over again. And I've seen a lot of people spiral deeper and deeper down to where you get to the level of a QAnon and you can now accept, blood, sucking pedophiles, because you never get to escape that feeling, the darkness of that. Where I think on the left, they're always looking for catharsis. And I think people got it with Biden, right? They're still trying to get more and more of it. Every time a positive thing comes out, that, like when everybody spontaneously danced in the street because he won, there was a sense of catharsis the good people got to release, to escape Mordor, escape the darkness. But the dark people still are there. Like they haven't
Well,
escaped anything.
and imagine where we would be if Georgia hadn't gone the way it did. I mean, if Trump weren't the colossal horse's patoot that he proved himself to be. I mean, really politically unastute in in biblical proportions. Imagine if McConnell had the Senate right now, where would this country be, and where would the national psyche be?
So what do we do?
Uh,
So we've got this sense. So I see this a lot with, again, the left and liberals, that they find catharsis all the time. I think like yoga is catharsis. Like people do like, oh, my life, but I got to go do yoga. And then they'll get a temporary sense of catharsis from it. They find these temporary catharses. But the people that are still in the dark, kept in that dark sense of non-cathartic emotion, they're still voting. They're still out there. They're still unhappy. What do we do? What kind of catharsis can we offer them? Because they don't want to go to yoga. We got to offer them something to get them out of, you can't just criticize them and fear them. And that's part of my thing with the Rhetoric Warriors project is I want to give you some tools for going into that darkness and bringing them out. What do you offer them when you've listened to the right wing orchestra for this long?
well, in some ways, that's part of what's. I mean, you could see that as the way that um, that the Biden appeals for bipartisanship are. I mean, it's there's a certain slice of it that's genuine, and there's another slice of it that's, to me at least, says, "I'm giving you one more chance."
Sure.
You know,
The
before
door's
I
still cracked
before I
if you'd like to
lower the
come through
hammer.
it.
Yeah, right. But that it seems to me that I mean, I look at this as Eros and Thanatos. It's love and death, and one side. I mean, you pursue one, and for damn sure you're going to get the other. Um, but
Is that it? Do they need
but
a good war, like a good, satisfying war?
but look at what we've done in relation to the pandemic. If Pearl Harbor happened tomorrow, how many people would say that ain't my problem? I mean, if you think isolationism just stops at the water's edge, I mean, we got people who are, who are invited to put a piece of cloth over their face to help improve public health, and are prepared to die on that hill, but they
But
won't be
but I feel like
dying on a Pacific island.
I feel like, again, in some ways, we're asking these people that still feel saturated with darkness to do one more small thing, and they just reject it. So if we were to say, look, there's a Hitler and we all have to pull together, it feels like, I think you're right with this love and death. Like these are death oriented people. They're not experiencing love. They're not experiencing
No.
happiness and elation and euphoria. They are still holding on to this darkness and they're caught in there. And not sure we're approaching it right as rhetoricians. We're not offering them ways out. We're not offering them catharsis and pathways out of that.
No, that is the $64,000 question. I mean, because if the motto of one perspective is bleep your feelings, then how do you help that side, or what message would cause that side to examine its own feelings, and to find some other reason to be alive, and some other reason to get up in the morning, and to have a positive relationship with neighbors, and to be if they choose members of a faith community. I mean, what's um, when you've been I mean, it's kind of like, well, I mean, this is my analogy, it may not be true, but how do you get a heroin addict out of, I mean, from what I understand, heroin's a lot of fun. It has some byproducts that are not so good for your life, but the high itself is quite a high. Well, how do you come back from that, even though that high is so destructive of your long-term interests?
Well,
Um,
I think of it sometimes like my father was a contrarian, cranky old guy, like to say
Hard
no.
to imagine, but okay, yeah.
Love to say no. Love to not offer endorsements and credibility to others. So found fault with things. And I see a lot of people as they get crankier, they get, when they're sick or they're caught, in this sort of negative emotion, negative space. They can't get success. They're under stress. They can't get happy relationships. And so I know some of the strategies that I used with my dad to try to lift him out of that emotionality because he was caught in an orb of this emotion. And in some ways it was just perseverating. It was just an
Yeah,
habituation. He didn't know how to get out of it. And so
yeah.
like I would do things like meta with him. Like I would do a little meta, get him try to get to an abstract level of like, how often are you happy every day? Like how
Mhm,
much happiness is there in your everyday life? And at first he'd be like, I don't care about being happy. But you let him get through that little storm and then get him to actually introspect a little bit just on that. Not about
mhm.
what's right in the world or whether people are lying to you, but how much happiness are you experiencing? And I find that really useful when I talk to people from the right that I'm trying to convert. It's just to get them to take some stock of their own happiness. And is there enough of it? Because it's unpleasant being upset and outraged and hateful and all those things. They're not pleasant to be in that state. So I find that's a little bit of an inroad that if you can get people to think, okay, well, what would make me happier then? Is it Donald Trump being president? Is it a bigger wall at the southern border? Is that going to make you happy?
Those are very good questions. I mean, I think that, you know, everybody's entitled, and you would wish it for everybody, but how when the spiral has corkscrewed into the ground, as some of these seem to have. um I mean, as the old joke goes, what is it that the Proud Boys are proud about? I mean, what's and is there, might there be something more um transcendent about which to be proud, or something that one could do that would create a genuine feeling of efficacy, satisfaction. I've earned my oxygen today, whatever would represent that positive, um, that positive outcome. I i i think that's a very, I mean, I don't feel like I have much of an answer at the moment, but I think that's a very good question, because, well, I mean, it isn't enough simply to say we're stuck with these folks, because they're stuck with us too. So I mean, if that's fairness, then we
But
have
we're
fairness.
wonderful, John.
Yeah, well, yeah, we're cuddly and charming. What's the problem? Um, uh, but I think it would be. I mean, what is a good life that doesn't involve the denial of a good life to others? Because part of the problem, I think, has been that the reward structure that's been created, at least over the last 4 years, has been, you'll be happier if all of these people are, dispossessed, harmed, whatever it happens to be. What
Well, I
about
think it's
what
that
about your happiness on its own?
it's that idea of they don't even say happy. They just say you need to remove these things because they are causing unhappiness. But to me, like lighting a beacon on the hill of, hey, what makes you happy? So if you're a racist, for example, we all know racists. We know they still exist in the world. You and I lived in very racist, you know, cultures. at different times in our life that have evolved towards certain things and away from certain things. What, instead of indicting racists and making sort of easy kind of villains out of them, which is, done constantly, what about the question is if you talk to somebody who has racist ideas, what does it make? Does that make you happy? Like, do you believing these things, like, does it enliven your life? Like I used to say, when people move out to Los Angeles, it's really difficult being a racist in Los Angeles because you'll be exhausted.
Yeah,
And you can't even tell what nationality people are. And there's so much mixed nationality and so much sort of polyglot and interesting, cultures intertwining with each other, that you end up celebrating it because there's really no other option how to exist there and hold on to negativity, because that's all you'd ever feel.
Mhm.
So even just approaching things through an emotional rhetoric, I think, is a useful way to opening up options for people that are caught in this of like, I don't care about what you believe or who you hate or anything else. Let's talk about making you happy. So, are you happy, John?
Well,
That's my point. John, are you happy?
we're not going to get anywhere without that. I think that's, I mean, simply, who are wearing the white hat and the black hat. I mean, that's always going to be perceptual. But um, what I mean, happiness isn't even. I mean, it can be the reduction of worry. I mean, I think more of a safety net is probably. I mean, more as if we had much of one. But I've spent some time in New Zealand and some other places where, um, you don't have as many Jeff Bezoses, but you have sort of a social floor that people rarely fall below, and that is more than just literal leveling. I mean, there's a kind of a potential mateship that comes with that. That is, um, that certainly is not abroad in the land that we're currently navigating.
Yeah, we burn other firewood in our camps. Like I think we do forget things like, that's one of the things I've always liked about you, John. You have a sense of joviality to you. I think you enjoy life. I think you know how to pursue enjoyment and happiness. Your kids are happy people. I've always admired that about you, that you've got that feeling, and that you pursue it well. So
Yeah, um, I've got some very interesting friends.
that helps, right? Maybe the right just needs more friends. Maybe everybody befriend a person on the right. Go to Rhetoric Warriors and take the course on converting one conservative. That's my social program right now. Just pick one, befriend a conservative, and just be nice to them. And watch them slowly come around.
We could do a whole lot worse.
For sure. Well, John, it's been super fun, man. I knew it would be again. I
Same here.
appreciate it.
My pleasure.
You make sure those students leave highly educated.
We're working on it. We're
Put
working on it.
put more good people out in the world, and we'll keep doing our thing. I appreciate everybody.
Thanks,
It's
Dan.
John Llewellyn, Wake Forest University. I don't know. You don't really sell anything, but
Not hardly.
root for UNC. That'll
That's
help them
that's
out.
okay. And Wake.
And Wake. All right, man. I will talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye bye.